Clara Dawson bit through her own lip to keep from screaming. Blood ran down her chin and dripped onto the white dress her dead mother had sewn. But she refused to give them the sound they wanted. The hemp rope cut deeper into her wrists every time she breathed, lashing her spread arm to the wagon wheel in the center of Elk Crossing's town square. 40 people watched. Her own father stood on the dry goods porch, arms folded, jaw set like stone. He didn't move, not one step, not one word. If this story moves you, hit subscribe and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The July sun pressed down on Elk Crossing like a punishment all its own. Dust hung in the air thick enough to taste, and the heat coming off the packed dirt of the town square could blister bare feet in minutes. Clara Dawson felt every degree of it against the rope burns on her wrists. "Hold still," Mrs. Edna Whitmore hissed from behind her, yanking the knot tighter against the wagon spoke. "You brought this on yourself, girl." Clara's fingers went white. She sucked air through her teeth, but didn't cry out. "That tight enough for you, Edna?" the blacksmith called from the shade of the livery. "Or you want me to fetch the chain?" Edna Whitmore stepped around to face Clara, her Sunday bonnet crisp and straight despite the heat, her eyes carrying something far colder than righteousness. "This is what happens," she said, loud enough for the crowd, "when a girl forgets who she belongs to." "I don't belong to anyone," Clara said. Edna slapped her. Open palm, full force, the crack of it echoing off the storefronts. Clara's head snapped sideways. She tasted copper. The crowd shifted, but nobody spoke. "You belong to this town," Edna said, voice shaking now. "And my son offered you a good name, a Christian name. You spat on it." Clara turned her head back slow, blood on her teeth. "Your son grabbed my arm in the barn and told me I didn't get a choice. That ain't an offer, Mrs. Whitmore. That's a threat." Silence. The kind that crawls under skin. Edna's face went rigid. She leaned in close, breath hot against Clara's ear. "You say that again, and I'll make sure they leave you here through the night." "Then leave me," Clara whispered. "I'll say it at sunrise, too." From the porch of the dry goods store, Harlan Dawson watched his daughter bleed. He held a tin cup in one hand, the other braced against the railing. His knuckles were white, but his boots stayed planted. "Harlan," the voice came from beside him. Old Pete, the farrier, leaning on his cane. "You just gonna stand there?" Harlan took a drink. "She made her bed." "She's 19, Harlan. She's your girl." "She was my girl," Harlan said, and the words came out flat as a plank. "Before she started shaming this family in front of the whole territory." Pete shook his head and limped away. He didn't look at Clara either. In the square, the crowd had swelled to nearly 50. Women clutched their children close. Men stood with thumbs hooked in their belts, some uneasy, most quiet. The bell tower cast a short shadow across the wagon, and Clara stood inside it, arms stretched wide, the white dress soaked through with sweat and spotted with blood where the rope had chewed into skin. She closed her eyes. Not to pray. She'd stopped that the night Silas Whitmore cornered her behind the feed store and told her she'd marry him whether she wanted to or not. She closed her eyes because if she looked at her father one more time and saw nothing, she'd break. And breaking was the one thing she wouldn't do for this town. "Somebody's coming." The voice came from the edge of the crowd. A boy, maybe 12, standing on a barrel near the livery, pointing toward the south road. Clara opened her eyes. A rider moved through the heat shimmer, slow and steady, leading a pack horse behind him. He wore no hat, which was strange for July. His hair was dark, pushed back from a face burned brown by sun and years. His shirt was plain, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and across his left shoulder blade, visible where the cotton pulled tight, ran a scar the length of a man's forearm. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Clara. "Who the hell is that?" the blacksmith muttered. Nobody answered. The rider stopped his horse at the edge of the square, swung down easy, and looped the reins over the hitching post. His boots hit the ground without hurry. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen, took a long drink, then walked straight into the center of town like he'd been invited. He stopped 6 feet from the wagon. Clara stared at him. He stared back. Something passed between them that had no name yet, just recognition. One wounded thing seeing another. "You the one they tied up?" he asked. His voice was low, unhurried, rough like river gravel. "What's it look like?" Clara said. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he looked at the ropes, at the blood-dried brown on her forearms, at the dress ruined with dust and shame, and the almost smile died. "Who did this?" he asked. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." He pulled a knife from his belt, not fast, not threatening, just certain. He knelt beside the wagon wheel and set the blade against the first rope. "Now hold on!" Sheriff Tom Redding pushed through the crowd, hand on his holster. "You can't just ride into town and start cutting." The stranger didn't look up. "Watch me." "I said hold on, mister. This girl's been sentenced by the community. She—" "Sentenced." The stranger said the word like it tasted rotten. He stood and faced the sheriff, knife still in hand, blade pointed at the ground. "You got a judge here? A courtroom? A written law that says you can rope a girl to a wagon for turning down a marriage?" Redding's mouth worked. No sound came out. "That's what I figured." The stranger knelt again. One clean cut. The left rope fell. Clara's arm dropped and she gasped, pain flooding back into muscles locked too long. "Mister, I'm warning you." "You're warning me." The stranger cut the second rope. Clara staggered forward, and he caught her elbow, steadied her, then let go. "You've got a girl bleeding in your town square in July heat, and you're warning me." He turned to the crowd. Every eye in Elk Crossing was on him. "Any of you want to tell me what crime she committed? Real crime, not gossip, not church talk. Real law." Silence. "She dishonored a good family." Edna Whitmore's voice cut from the side. She marched forward, finger raised. "She refused my son's proposal and then paraded herself with a Shoshone man at the trading post, laughing, touching, in front of everyone." The stranger looked at her for a long time. "So she said no to your boy and talked to somebody you don't like." "She shamed us." "Ma'am, the only shame I see is a 19-year-old girl bleeding from rope burns while 50 grown folks watch." He paused. "And a mother defending the son who couldn't take no for an answer." Edna's face went purple. "How dare you!" "Where is he?" the stranger asked. "Where's your son right now?" Silence again, heavier this time. Clara spoke, her voice raw. "He's in the saloon. He's been in the saloon since they tied me. Didn't even come to watch." The stranger nodded slowly. "Brave man." "You don't know anything about my son," Edna shouted. "I know he ain't here," the stranger said. "I know a man who ropes a woman to a wagon and then goes drinking ain't a man at all. And I know," he looked at the sheriff, "that any town that calls this justice has forgotten what the word means." Sheriff Redding shifted his weight. Sweat ran down his temples. "Look, mister, I don't know who you are." "Name's Josiah Kane. I filed a homestead claim on the Broken Ridge property, 40 acres past the creek. Got my papers right here if you need to see them. He reached into his shirt pocket and held out a folded document. Redding took it, read it again. His jaw tightened. This is federal land grant. It is. You're settling here? I am. Josiah took the paper back and folded it carefully. Which means this girl is now under the protection of a property-holding citizen of this territory. And I'm telling you, formally, that what you've done here today ain't legal, ain't Christian, and ain't something I'll allow to happen again. Clara stared at him. She'd never heard a man use the law like a shield for someone other than himself. She ain't your kin, Redding said weakly. She don't need to be my kin, Josiah replied. She needs to be free, and right now she's coming with me. He turned to Clara. Up close, she could see his eyes were gray, steady, carrying something old and heavy behind them. Not pity, something else. Understanding, maybe, or memory. You don't have to come, he said quietly, so only she could hear. But I've got water, a horse, and a cabin with a door that locks from the inside. Your choice. Clara looked across the square. Her father still stood on the porch. Their eyes met. She waited 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, for him to say something, to step forward, to be her father. Harlan Dawson looked away. Something broke inside Clara then, not her spirit. That had held through the rope and the slap and the sun. What broke was the last thread of hope that her father would choose her over his pride. I'll come, she said to Josiah. He nodded once. No triumph in it, no satisfaction, just acknowledgement. They walked toward his horse. Clara's legs shook with every step, her wrists throbbing, the white dress dragging in the dust behind her. Josiah matched her pace, staying half a step behind, not leading, accompanying. You're making a mistake, girl. Edna's voice chased them across the square. You walk away now, there's no coming back. Clara stopped. She didn't turn all the way around, just tilted her head enough for her voice to carry. That's the first honest thing you've said all day, Mrs. Whitmore. A few people in the crowd breathed in sharp. Someone near the back, a woman's voice Clara didn't recognize, let out a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been relief. Josiah helped her onto the horse. His hands were careful around her damaged wrists, lifting her by the waist instead. She settled into the saddle and looked down at him. Why? She asked. You don't know me. Josiah gathered the reins and began leading the horse toward the south road. 3 years ago, he said, not looking up, I came home from burying my wife and my boy. Typhus took them both in the same week. I stood in a cabin with 2 empty beds, and nobody in the world who gave a damn whether I lived or died. Clara didn't speak. I swore that day, if I ever saw somebody standing alone against a crowd, I wouldn't look away. Because looking away is what killed them. Not the fever. The neighbors who wouldn't come near our homestead. The doctor who said he was too busy. The church that said it was God's will. His voice stayed level, but his hand tightened on the reins. I ain't God, Miss Dawson, but I got a knife and I got a backbone. And today, that was enough. Clara's throat closed, not from pain, from the terrible weight of being seen by someone who understood what it cost. They walked in silence for a while. The town fell behind them. The road stretched ahead through scrub brush and dry grass, the mountains bruising purple against the sky. How do you know my name? Clara asked. Heard them shouting it when they tied you. He paused. Heard your father say it like he was trying to throw it away. Clara flinched. He wasn't always like that. People rarely are. My mother died 4 years ago. After that, he just... She stopped. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Because I ain't asking, Josiah said. Folks talk easier when nobody's pulling at the rope. That word, rope, hit different now. Clara looked at her wrists. The raw skin was already darkening in the sun, bruises forming beneath the burns. These marks would be with her for weeks, maybe longer. Josiah, she said. He looked up. If you're lying about the cabin and the door that locks, I will kill you in your sleep. I need you to know that. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded, slow and serious. Fair enough. And somehow, in that moment, Clara felt safer than she had in months. The trail narrowed as they climbed. Josiah led the horse through a shallow creek bed where the water ran cool and clear over smooth stones. Clara leaned down and cupped water in her hands, pressing it against her wrists. The cold was sharp and merciful. How much farther? She asked. About a mile. There's a clearing at the top of the ridge. Cabins there. You built it yourself? Most of it. Still working on the porch. Why out here? Why so far from town? Josiah was quiet for a moment. Because I've had enough of towns. Clara understood that in her bones. As they crested the ridge, the land opened up. Wildflowers covered the meadow in waves of yellow and blue, and the cabin sat at its center, small but solid, built from pine logs with a stone chimney. A half-finished porch wrapped around the front, boards stacked neat beside it. Josiah helped her down. This time his hand steadied her at the shoulders, brief and respectful, then pulled away. Water's from the spring behind the house, he said. Outhouse is east. There's food inside. Stew from yesterday and bread I baked this morning. Ain't fancy. I haven't eaten since yesterday, Clara said. Something crossed his face. Anger, but not at her. Go inside. Eat. I'll tend the horses. Clara climbed the unfinished steps and pushed open the door. The cabin was one room, simple, swept clean. A cot with a wool blanket, a table with 2 chairs, a cook stove still warm from morning. On the wall, a single shelf held a Bible, a tin-type photograph in a wooden frame, and a child's carved horse, small enough to fit in a palm. Clara picked up the tintype. A woman with dark hair and kind eyes held an infant against her chest. Both of them looked at the camera like they trusted whoever stood behind it. She set it down carefully and didn't touch it again. When Josiah came in, Clara was seated at the table, eating stew with the focused silence of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be fed without conditions. He sat across from her, didn't eat, just poured himself coffee and waited. You lost them, Clara said between bites. Not a question. I did. What were their names? He took a breath. Margaret, and the boy was Samuel. He was 14 months. Clara set down the spoon. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just be alive. That's enough for today. She almost smiled at that. Almost. You said that before, at the wagon. Because it's true. Some days just breathing is the bravest thing a person can do. Outside, the summer wind pushed through the meadow grass and set the wildflowers swaying. Inside the cabin, 2 strangers sat across a table from each other, both carrying wounds they hadn't chosen, both still breathing in spite of it all. Clara finished the stew and pushed the bowl aside. She looked at Josiah across the table, this man who'd walked into a town square full of hostility and drawn a knife not to fight, but to free. I'm not going to thank you, she said. Josiah raised an eyebrow. Because what you did shouldn't be remarkable. Cutting a girl loose from a wagon shouldn't make a man special. It should just make him decent. Josiah held her gaze. Then he nodded. You're right. But I will say this. Clara straightened in her chair, and despite the bruises, despite the ruined dress, despite everything that town had tried to strip from her voice was iron. I ain't going back. Not to my father's house. Not to that square. Not to any place that thinks roping a woman is the same as teaching her a lesson. Nobody's asking you to go back, Josiah said. Good. Clara stood. Then show me where I sleep. And tomorrow, show me how to swing a hammer. Because if I'm staying, I'm building. Josiah stood too. He pulled the wool blanket from the cot and held it out. Bed's yours. I'll take the floor by the stove. Clara took the blanket. Their fingers didn't touch, but something shifted in the room, subtle as a change in wind direction. Not romance. Not yet. Just the beginning of something neither of them had words for. Two people agreeing, without saying it, that they weren't going to let the world make them smaller. Clara lay in the cot that night, staring at the ceiling, her wrists wrapped in strips of clean cloth Josiah had cut from his own spare shirt. The cabin creaked gently in the wind. She could hear his breathing near the stove, steady and untroubled. She thought about her mother, about the dress, now filthy and crumpled in the corner, about Silas Whitmore's hand on her arm in the barn, his breath sour with whiskey, his voice telling her she didn't get to say no. She thought about her father's face on that porch, the way he'd looked away like she was already buried. And she thought about Josiah's words. Just be alive. That's enough for today. Clara pressed her bandaged wrists together beneath the blanket and made herself a promise. She would be alive tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day until the girl they tried to break became the woman they never expected. Outside, the summer stars burned fierce and silent over Broken Ridge. No church bells rang. No crowd gathered. No ropes tightened. Just the wind. Just the quiet. Just a girl named Clara Dawson, finally sleeping without someone else's shame pressing down on her chest. And in the morning, she would build. Clara woke to the sound of hammering. She sat up too fast, and her wrists screamed. The cloth wrappings had loosened in the night, and the raw skin beneath had stuck to the fabric. She peeled it away slow, teeth clenched, and swung her feet to the floor. The cabin door was open. Morning light spilled across the pine boards, and beyond it, she could hear Josiah working. Steady rhythm, no wasted motion. Just a man putting a nail where it belonged. She stood, rolled the stiffness from her shoulders, and walked outside. Josiah was crouched at the far end of the porch frame, fitting a board into place. His shirt was already damp with sweat, and the scar along his shoulder blade pulled tight every time he raised the hammer. He didn't look up when she came out, but he said, "Coffee's on the stove, bread's on the table." "I told you I wanted to learn to swing a hammer." "And I told you to eat first." He drove another nail. "Can't build nothing on an empty stomach." Clara almost argued, but her body made the decision for her. She went back inside, poured coffee into a tin cup, and ate 2 slices of bread standing at the table. She ate fast, the way people eat when they've learned that food can be taken away. When she came back out, Josiah was standing, wiping his hands on his trousers. He held the hammer out to her, handle first. "Grip it near the end," he said, "not the middle. You'll lose power choking up." Clara took it. The weight surprised her. She'd held plenty of heavy things. Buckets, saddles, iron pots. But there was something different about holding a tool meant for creating instead of carrying. "See that nail?" Josiah pointed to a board already lined up against the frame. 3 hits. Don't swing wild. Let the weight do the work. Clara set the nail, steadied it, and swung. The head glanced off, and the nail bent sideways. "That's 1, Josiah said. No judgment, no correction, just counting." She pulled the bent nail, set a new one, and tried again. This time the hit was true, and the nail sank half an inch into the wood. The vibration ran up her arm and into her chest, and something about it felt like an answer she'd been waiting for. "Better," Josiah said. "Don't patronize me." "I ain't. That was a clean strike. Do it again." She did it again, and again. By the time the sun had climbed 2 fists above the ridge, Clara had driven 11 nails, and her arms were shaking. Her wrists burned where the bandages rubbed against the raw wounds, but she didn't stop. "Clara," Josiah's voice was firm. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding through the wraps. Sit down." She looked at her wrists. He was right. Pink had seeped through the white cloth, spreading in uneven patches. She set the hammer down and sat on the porch edge, breathing hard. Josiah disappeared inside and came back with clean cloth and a tin of salve. He knelt in front of her and held out his hand, palm up, not reaching for her, waiting. Clara hesitated, then placed her wrist in his hand. He unwrapped the old bandage with a gentleness that didn't match his rough fingers. The wounds were ugly, raw red grooves circling both wrists, some crusted, some still weeping. Josiah's jaw tightened when he saw them, a muscle jumping near his ear, but his hands stayed steady. "How long did they have you tied?" he asked quietly. "Since dawn. You came around noon." 6 hours. He said it flat, not a question, just measuring the cruelty. In July heat, no water. Edna Whitmore said thirst was part of the lesson. Josiah applied the salve without speaking. His silence said more than any curse would have. "You're angry," Clara said. "I've been angry for 3 years, Miss Dawson. This is just a different flavor." He wrapped her wrists with fresh cloth, tight enough to hold, loose enough to let the skin breathe. When he finished, he didn't let go right away. His thumb rested against the inside of her wrist, just above the bandage, where her pulse beat quick and alive. "You feel that?" he said. "My heartbeat?" "That's you. That's what they couldn't tie down." He released her hand and stood. "Now drink some water before you pass out. I don't carry fainting women. It hurts my back." Clara laughed. It came out rough and surprised, like something shaken loose. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. Maybe months, maybe longer. They worked through the morning, trading the hammer back and forth, falling into a rhythm that didn't require conversation. Josiah showed her how to measure boards by eye, how to shave an edge with a plane, how to test a joint by pressing her weight against it. He never took a tool from her hands. If she struggled, he waited. If she asked, he demonstrated once and stepped back. By midday, 3 new porch boards were laid and nailed tight. Clara stood on them, barefoot, and felt the wood warm beneath her feet. Solid. Level. Hers. "Not bad for a first day," Josiah said from the steps. "Not bad for a girl they said wasn't fit for anything but marrying," Clara replied. Josiah looked at her. Really looked, the way he had in the square, like he was seeing something the rest of the world had missed. "Who told you that?" "Everyone. My father, the school teacher, Mrs. Whitmore. The whole town, Josiah. Every single one of them looked at me and saw a wife or a problem. Nothing in between." "What did you see?" Clara paused. Nobody had ever asked her that. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm starting to figure it out." They ate lunch on the porch. Cold stew and hard bread and water from the spring. Clara sat with her legs hanging over the edge, her bandaged wrists resting in her lap. And for the first time in longer than she could measure, she felt her shoulders drop away from her ears. "Tell me about Margaret," she said. Josiah set down his cup. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you'll tell me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She could gut a fish faster than any man I knew. Sang hymns off key and didn't care who heard. She'd argue with me about the dumbest things, which direction to hang the wash, whether cornbread needed sugar. She always said it didn't. She was wrong." Clara smiled. "She sounds stubborn." "She was the most stubborn woman in 3 counties. That's why I married her." He paused. "And Samuel, he had her eyes. Same color, same way of looking at you, like he already knew what you were thinking." "How old was he when—" 14 months, 3 days. I counted. Josiah stared at his hands. "The neighbors wouldn't come. When the typhus hit, they boarded their doors and left us. The doctor rode past twice and didn't stop. I buried them both under the elm tree behind our old place in Missouri. And then you came here." "Sold everything, walked away. Figured if I went far enough, the memory might thin out." He shook his head. "It doesn't. But the work helps. Keeps the hands busy so the mind don't eat itself." Clara understood that. She'd spent 4 years since her mother's death keeping her hands busy too. Cooking, scrubbing, mending, anything to stop thinking about the empty chair at the table and the father who'd crawled so far inside a bottle he forgot he had a daughter who needed him.
"Josiah."
"Yeah?"
"Yesterday, when you cut those ropes—"
"Was it for me? Or was it for Margaret?" He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. "Both," he said. "And I ain't ashamed of that." Clara nodded. "Good, because I ain't interested in being somebody else's ghost." "You ain't nobody's ghost, Clara. You're the loudest living person I've met in 3 years." That almost made her laugh again. Almost. The afternoon passed in work and quiet. Clara finished sanding a board while Josiah split firewood. They moved around each other like people who'd figured out the shape of shared space without needing to discuss it. Then, just past 3 o'clock, the dog started barking. Josiah didn't have a dog. He straightened from the chopping block, axe still in hand, and turned toward the trail. Clara came around the side of the cabin and saw it, a shape moving through the brush, low and unsteady. Not a rider. Someone on foot. Josiah shifted the axe to his left hand and moved toward the fence. Clara touched his arm. "Wait!" The shape stumbled into the clearing. A girl, barefoot, dress torn at the shoulder, hair tangled and wild. She couldn't have been older than 15. She was limping on her right foot and holding her left arm close to her body, like something was broken or badly bruised. Clara recognized her immediately. Nettie Barlow, the blacksmith's niece. The quiet girl who always sat in the back pew and never raised her hand in school. The girl who'd once slipped Clara a biscuit under the table when Harlan had sent her to church without breakfast. "Nettie," Clara breathed. The girl looked up. Her face was swollen on one side, the eye above it nearly shut. When she saw Clara, her knees buckled and she went down hard in the dirt. Clara was off the porch and through the gate before Josiah could move. She dropped beside Nettie and gathered her up, pulling the girl against her chest. Nettie was shaking so hard her teeth chattered despite the July heat. "They found out," Nettie whispered. "They found out I helped you." Clara's blood went cold. "Helped me? How?" "I'm the one who told the Shoshone trader where you'd be that day at the post. I arranged it so you'd have someone to talk to, someone outside. I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought if you had a friend, you wouldn't look so sad all the time." Clara's arms tightened around her. "Oh, Nettie." "Silas figured it out. He got Lyle Cooper drunk, and Lyle told him everything. Silas came to my uncle's forge this morning and told them I was the reason you shamed the town." Nettie's whole body heaved with a sob she'd been holding back for miles. "My uncle tied me to the barn post, said I'd stay there till I confessed publicly. How'd you get free? Josiah asked from above them, his voice carefully controlled. Nettie looked up at him with her one good eye.
I dislocated my thumb to slip the rope. Then I ran.
Josiah closed his eyes. When he opened them, the gray had gone to steel.
How far did you walk? I don't know. I started before dawn. I followed the creek like Clara used to talk about. Josiah knelt and examined Nettie's arm. This your thumb? It went back in on its own when I hit it against a tree. Nettie winced as he touched near the joint. But my arm. My uncle grabbed me when I tried to pull away the first time. Something popped. Shoulder, Josiah said. Might be dislocated, might be strained. I can set it if it's out, but it'll hurt.
Everything already hurts,
Nettie said. Clara helped her to her feet, and they brought her inside. Josiah gave up his chair, poured water, set bread and dried meat on the table. Nettie ate with her good hand, tears running down her face between bites, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of being fed. Clara sat beside her on the floor, one hand on the girl's knee, steady and grounding.
Nettie, Clara said gently, you said Silas figured it out.
Nettie nodded.
What exactly did Silas tell your uncle?
Nettie swallowed hard.
He said you and the Shoshone man were...
She stopped. He lied, Clara. He told everyone you were meeting that man for improper reasons, that I was your go-between, that the whole thing was planned. Clara felt the room tilt.
None of that is true. I know, but Silas...
Nettie's voice dropped.
Clara, Silas is the one who told his mother to have you tied. The whole thing, the wagon, the square, the crowd, it was his idea. He told Edna if they shamed you enough, you'd come crawling back and accept his proposal, just to make it stop.
The silence that followed was the kind that precedes thunder. Josiah stood by the window, arms crossed. Say that again, he said quietly. Nettie looked at him.
Silas Whitmore set the whole thing up. The tying, the public shaming, all of it. Because Clara said no.
Clara's hands were shaking. Not from fear. From rage so pure it burned white.
He planned it.
He stood in that saloon drinking while his mother tied me to a wagon, and he planned it.
He told Lyle it would take 2 days, Nettie said.
2 days in the square, and you'd break. Clara stood up. She paced the length of the small cabin, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. Her bandaged wrists throbbed with every heartbeat.
I need to go back, she said.
No, Josiah said. He can't get away with this.
He won't. But you walking back into that town right now is exactly what he wants. You show up angry. You prove his story. You're the wild girl who lost her mind, the one who needs controlling.
Clara stopped pacing. She hated that he was right.
Then what? She demanded. I just sit here and let him poison the whole town against me?
You sit here and you get strong, Josiah said. You let that girl heal. He nodded toward Nettie. And you wait for the truth to do what it always does.
What's that?
Come out. Truth's like water, Clara.
You can dam it up, but it finds the cracks.
Clara stared at him. You talk real pretty for a man who solved his last problem with a knife. Josiah almost smiled. Different problems, different tools. Nettie was watching them both, her swollen eye leaking tears she probably didn't even feel anymore.
There's something else, she said.
Both of them turned.
Silas is coming. He told Lyle he'd handle the situation himself. That was yesterday morning. If he tracked me to the creek...
He'll follow it here, Josiah finished. Clara and Josiah looked at each other. The cabin suddenly felt very small. How many men? Josiah asked.
Silas doesn't ride alone, Nettie said. He's got Lyle, and Big Tom from the mill, and sometimes the Tucker brothers.
That's 5 men.
4. One of the Tucker brothers broke his leg last month.
4 men. Josiah uncrossed his arms. Coming for 2 women and a man with an axe and a homestead claim. Clara straightened.
You're not fighting them alone.
I ain't fighting anybody, Josiah said. Not unless they make me. This is federal land. I've got papers. Any man who rides onto this property with intent to harm is breaking territorial law, and I'll make sure every one of them knows it before they dismount.
And if they don't care about the law?
Josiah looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something behind the calm. Not fear. Readiness. The kind of thing that lived inside men who'd survived wars they didn't start. Then I'll care about it for them, he said. The rest of the afternoon moved fast. Josiah showed Clara where he kept the rifle, above the doorframe, loaded, oiled, clean. He didn't hand it to her, but he showed her how to reach it. You know how to shoot? He asked.
My mother taught me before she died. Squirrels and rabbits.
A man ain't much different than a rabbit when he's scared enough, Josiah said. Point and breathe. Don't close your eyes.
I won't close my eyes.
I know you won't. He reinforced the gate while Clara tended Nettie's arm. It wasn't dislocated after all, just badly wrenched, and Clara fashioned a sling from a flour sack and tied it gentle across the girl's chest. You walked 12 miles on a bad foot with a hurt arm, Clara said, tying the last knot. You know how tough that makes you? Nettie shook her head.
I was just scared.
That's what tough is, Nettie. Scared and still moving. Nettie's good hand found Clara's.
Are you scared now?
Clara thought about lying, decided against it.
Yeah,
but I've got a porch I just built, and I ain't letting Silas Whitmore take that from me, too. As the sun dropped low and the heat began to loosen its grip on the ridge, Josiah came inside carrying a bucket of spring water. He set it on the table and looked at both women. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to hear all of it before you speak. Clara nodded. Nettie went still. Josiah pulled out the other chair and sat. He rested his forearms on his knees and stared at the floor for a moment before looking up. Before I came to Elk Crossing, I spent 3 months in Cheyenne. Worked for a cattleman named Davis, running fence line. One night, I'm in the saloon, and a man comes in asking about hiring riders for a town out west. Said they needed someone to keep order, not a lawman, more like private enforcement. The pay was good. The man doing the asking was Silas Whitmore. Clara stopped breathing. I didn't take the job, Josiah said quickly. Something about him rubbed wrong. The way he talked about the town, like he owned it, like the people in it were pieces on a board. I said no, and he moved on. But I remembered the name of the town, Elk Crossing. And when I filed my homestead claim 2 months later and saw it was the same territory, I figured it was just coincidence. It wasn't, Clara said. No, it wasn't. I think Silas has been building himself a little kingdom out here. His mother runs the church ladies. His father runs the pulpit. And Silas, Josiah paused, Silas wants to run everything else. A wife from a good family, a forge through his connection to the Barlows, control of the trade routes through the pass. You saying no to him wasn't just a rejection, Clara. It was a threat to everything he's building. Clara sat down slowly. The picture was bigger than she'd thought. Bigger than a spurned proposal. Bigger than a woman tied to a wagon. He's not coming for me because he's angry, she said. He's coming because if I stay free, other people might realize they can say no too. Josiah nodded. That's the size of it. Nettie spoke up, her voice small but clear.
My uncle didn't tie me because I helped Clara. He tied me because Silas told him to. And my uncle did it because Silas controls who gets contracts for the mine equipment. If my uncle loses that work, the forge closes.
3 people in a cabin, and suddenly the ropes that had bound Clara and Nettie weren't just hemp. They were the threads of a web that one man had been spinning since long before Clara ever refused his hand.
So what do we do?
Clara asked. Josiah stood and moved to the window. The trail was empty, the ridge quiet. But quiet didn't mean safe. We do what they don't expect. We don't run. We don't hide. We don't fight.
Then what?
We build. He turned from the window. We finish this porch. We make this homestead something permanent, something visible. And when people from town come up this ridge and see 2 women and a man living free and whole, without permission from Silas Whitmore, or his mother, or his church, that's the thing that'll crack his kingdom.
That's a long game,
Clara said. Best games are. Clara looked at Nettie. The girl's face was still swollen, her arms still bound, her feet still raw from walking. But in her one good eye, Clara saw something that hadn't been there when she stumbled out of the brush that afternoon. She saw belief. "All right," Clara said. "We build." Night fell heavy and warm. Josiah took the porch, sleeping across the doorway with the axe beside him and his boots on. Clara and Nettie shared the cot, the girl curled against Clara's side, her breathing ragged with pain, but slowing towards sleep.
"Clara?"
Nettie whispered in the dark.
"Yeah?" "When they tied you to that wagon, what did you think about?"
Clara stared at the ceiling. "I thought about my mother, about the hills she used to take me to. I thought about how I'd never let anyone make me feel that small again."
"Did it work?"
"I'm here, ain't I?" Nettie pressed closer.
"Clara?"
"Yeah?"
"Thank you for opening the gate."
Clara wrapped her arm around the girl and held on tight. "Just promise me something, Nettie."
"What?"
"When the next girl comes running, you open it too." Nettie was quiet for a moment. Then, barely a whisper,
"I promise."
Outside, Josiah sat on the porch with his back against the doorframe, eyes on the dark trail. His hand rested on the axe handle. The summer stars burned overhead, bright and indifferent. Somewhere out there, Silas Whitmore was driving. 4 men at his back, rope in his saddlebag. And Josiah Kane sat in the dark and waited, because he'd spent 3 years running from ghosts, and he was done running. Whatever came up that trail, he'd meet it standing. They came at first light. Josiah heard them before he saw them. 4 horses moving through the creek bed, hooves splashing against stone, no effort made to stay quiet. Men who thought numbers made them brave. He stood from the porch, rolled his neck, and picked up the axe. Not to swing, to hold. A man with an axe in his hand gets listened to different than a man with empty palms. "Clara," he said through the cabin door. "Wake Nettie. Stay inside." Clara was already up. She'd heard the horses too. She moved to the window and looked down the trail, her jaw tight, her bandaged hands steady. "4 riders," she said. "Silas is in front." "I know." "Josiah, if he—" "Stay inside. I ain't hiding." He turned. Their eyes met through the doorway. "I ain't asking you to hide. I'm asking you to let me speak first. If talking don't work, you'll know." And the rifle's above the door. Clara held his gaze for 3 hard seconds. Then she nodded. Josiah walked down the unfinished porch steps and crossed the yard to the gate. He planted himself in front of it, feet wide, axe resting against his thigh, and waited. Silas Whitmore rode in first. He was younger than Josiah expected. 24, maybe 25,
with a clean jaw and pressed clothes that had no business being that neat on a trail ride. His hat was new. His boots were new. Everything about him looked like a man playing dress-up as someone who mattered. Behind him rode Lyle Cooper, thin as a fence post, eyes red from drink. Big Tom from the mill sat heavy on a draft horse, thick arms crossed over a barrel chest. And trailing behind, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, was the younger Tucker brother, Emmett, barely 20, fidgeting with his reins. Silas pulled up 10 feet from the gate and smiled. It was the kind of smile that never reached higher than the lips. "Mornin'," Silas said. "You must be the homesteader." "Josiah Kane." "Silas Whitmore. I believe you've got something that belongs to my town." "Nothing here belongs to your town." Silas leaned forward in the saddle. The Dawson girl and the Barlow girl both ran from lawful community discipline. I'm here to bring them back. Josiah didn't move. Tying women to wagons and barn posts ain't discipline. It's assault. And this is federal land. You got no authority here. Silas laughed. Short, sharp, like a bark. Federal land. That's cute. You think a piece of paper from some office in Washington means anything out here? This is elk crossing territory. My father preaches here. My mother keeps order. And I keep things running smooth. Smooth, Josiah repeated. That what you call it when a girl's got rope burns around her wrists because she wouldn't marry you? The smile dropped off Silas's face. Behind him, Lyle shifted in his saddle. Big Tom uncrossed his arms. Careful, Silas said. I'm always careful, but I ain't quiet. There's a difference. Silas dismounted. He took his time, brushing dust from his coat, adjusting his hat. Everything deliberate. Everything for show. He walked to within 3 feet of the gate and looked Josiah up and down. Here's what's going to happen, Silas said, voice dropping low enough that only Josiah could hear. You're going to step aside. I'm going to collect what I came for. And then we're going to forget this whole ugly business. You get to keep your homestead. I get my town back in order. Everybody wins. Except Clara. Clara doesn't know what she wants. Girls like her never do. She needs guidance. She needs you to leave her alone. Silas's jaw tightened. Last chance, Kane. Move. No. For a long moment, nothing happened. The morning air hung between them like a held breath. Then Silas stepped back and nodded to Big Tom. The big man dismounted and walked forward, rolling his shoulders. He was 6.5 feet if he was an inch, and his hands were the size of dinner plates. I don't want trouble with you, stranger, Big Tom said, and to his credit, he sounded like he meant it. But Silas pays my wages, and I got a family to feed. Then think about your family, Josiah said, because I'm standing on my own land with an axe in my hand and the legal right to defend it. You step through this gate, you ain't a man doing a job. You're a trespasser, and I will treat you accordingly. Big Tom stopped. He looked back at Silas. Oh, for God's sake. Silas pushed past Big Tom and grabbed the gate latch. I'll do it The axe came up. Not swinging, just rising to chest height, the blade catching the morning light. Silas froze with his hand on the latch. Touch that gate, Josiah said, voice gone to gravel, and you'll pull back a stump. Nobody breathed. From inside the cabin, a sound. The click of a rifle being cocked. Clara appeared in the doorway, the long gun steady in her bandaged hands, barrel pointed squarely at Silas Whitmore's chest. He told you no, Clara said. I'm telling you something different. I'm telling you to get on your horse and ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of. And if you ever send someone to tie up a 15-year-old girl because she showed me kindness, I swear on my mother's grave I'll make sure every homestead, every trading post, and every federal office from here to Cheyenne knows exactly what kind of man you are." Silas stared at her.
The composure cracked, just for a second, and beneath it, Clara saw what she'd always suspected. He wasn't angry. He was afraid. Afraid of a woman who wouldn't bend. "You won't shoot me," Silas said, but his voice had gone thin.
"Try me," Clara said. "I got nothing left to lose. You made sure of that."
Silence. Long and electric. Then Emmett Tucker spoke from the back. "Silas, let's go." "Shut up, Emmett." "I mean it." The young man's voice cracked. "This ain't what you said it was. You said we were collecting runaways. You didn't say nothing about a man with an axe and a woman with a rifle on federal land. My brother already broke his leg on account of your business. I ain't losing mine." Silas turned on him. "You ride away now, you're done in Elk Crossing." Emmett looked at Silas for a long time. Then he looked at Clara in the doorway, bandages on her wrists, rifle in her grip, standing in a cabin she'd helped build. Something shifted in his face. "Maybe I'm done with Elk Crossing," Emmett said. He turned his horse and rode back down the trail without looking back. Silas watched him go. A vein pulsed in his temple. He turned to Lyle. "You too?" Lyle Cooper's hands were shaking. Whether from hangover or fear, it was hard to tell. "Silas, she's got a gun." "It's one woman." "It's one woman who ain't scared of you. And I am." Lyle gathered his reins. "I'm sorry, Silas. I ain't dying over this." He rode after Emmett. 2 down, 2 left. Silas turned to Big Tom. The big man stood with his hands at his sides, eyes moving between the axe and the rifle, calculating. "Tom," Silas said, "we had an agreement." Big Tom looked at Josiah. "You really going to swing that thing?" "If I have to," Josiah said, "but I'd rather not. I imagine your wife would prefer you came home with both arms." Big Tom exhaled through his nose. He looked back at Silas. "Find yourself another man. This ain't worth it." He mounted his horse and left at a slow walk, not rushing, just done. Silas Whitmore stood alone in front of the gate. No men behind him, no leverage, no audience. Just a 24-year-old boy dressed up like power, facing a man who'd buried his family and a woman who'd survived his cruelty, and finding out for the first time in his life that money and last names weren't enough. "This ain't over," Silas said. "Yeah, it is," Clara replied from the doorway. "You just don't know it yet." Silas's face contorted. For a moment, Clara thought he might charge the gate anyway, pride overriding every instinct. But Josiah shifted the axe, just slightly, and the moment passed. Silas pointed at Clara. "You'll regret this, both of you. I will burn this place to the ground before you let what?" Josiah stepped forward. One step. That was all it took. "Before you let a woman live free? Before you let a girl heal in peace? You hear yourself, boy? You sound like every bully who ever lived, and every one of them ended up alone. Go home. Tell your mother the game's done." Silas's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He stood there, shaking with rage, and then he turned and mounted his horse. He yanked the reins hard enough to make the animal jerk, and he rode down the trail at a punishing gallop. Clara lowered the rifle. Her arms were trembling. Not from fear, from the adrenaline leaving her body in one long rush. Josiah set the axe against the fence post and turned toward her. "You all right?" "I don't know." Clara sat down on the top step, the rifle across her knees. "I've never pointed a gun at a person before." "Would you have pulled the trigger?"
Clara thought about it. Honestly thought about it. If he touched Nettie? Yes. Then you answered your own question. Behind them, the cabin door creaked open. Nettie stood in the frame, pale, her good arm gripping the door jamb.
Is he gone? He's gone, Clara said. Come sit down. Nettie came out on shaking legs and sat beside Clara. The three of them stayed on the porch for a long time, not speaking, just breathing, letting the silence fill back in where Silas's threat had punched holes. He said he'd burn this place, Nettie whispered. He says a lot of things, Josiah replied, but burning a federal homestead is a hanging offense. Silas Whitmore loves himself too much to swing. You sure about that? Clara asked. No. Josiah picked up his coffee from where he'd left it the night before, cold now, and drank it anyway. But I'm sure about that gate, and I'm sure about that rifle, and I'm sure about the two of you. Clara looked at him. What about us? You didn't run. Both of you had every reason to. Nettie could have hid under the cot. You could have stayed behind the door. But you stood up.
That tells me more about what's going to happen next than anything Silas Whitmore could threaten. Nettie leaned against Clara's shoulder. What is going to happen next? Before anyone could answer, a sound drifted up from the trail. Not hooves this time. Footsteps. And a voice calling out. Hello, the cabin! Josiah was on his feet, axe in hand. I ain't armed, the voice called again, and I ain't with Whitmore. A man appeared at the edge of the clearing, old, weathered, leaning hard on a walking cane. White hair stuck out from under a hat that had seen better decades. He stopped at the fence and raised both hands, cane and all. Clara stood. She knew him. Pete? Old Pete, the farrier. The man who'd spoken to her father on the porch. The one who'd limped away when Harlan refused to move. Hello, Clara girl, Pete said. His voice was rougher than she remembered, like he'd been chewing on something bitter for 2 days.
I come to tell you something, and I reckon you ain't going to like it.
Josiah kept the axe up. Speak. Pete looked at him, then at Clara, then at Nettie. His eyes lingered on the girl's sling and swollen face, and something in the old man sagged.
Lord, he whispered. Nettie Barlow. They did this to you, child?
Nettie nodded. Pete closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. I'm too old to do much fighting, and I'm too stiff to ride fast. But I ain't too old to know right from wrong. And what's happening in that town is wrong. Tell us something we don't know, Pete, Clara said. All right, I will. Pete gripped his cane with both hands. Silas rode back to town an hour ago. Came in hot, yelling about federal homesteads and ungrateful women. Went straight to his daddy's church and called a meeting. What kind of meeting? Josiah asked. The kind where he tells everyone you threatened him with an axe, and Clara pointed a rifle at his head. The kind where he says you're both dangerous, that you've stolen 2 women and you're harboring them against their will. Clara's fists clenched. That's a lie. Course it is. But lies work fast in a small town, Clara. You know that better than anyone. What's he asking for? Josiah said. Pete looked at him straight. He's asking the men of Elk Crossing to ride up here and take this homestead by force. Says it's a matter of community safety. Says if the federal government won't act, the town will. The words landed like stones in still water. How many agreed? Clara asked. Pete hesitated. Most of them. Not because they believe Silas. Because they're scared of him. He controls the mine contracts, the lumber supply, the trade route permits. A man goes against Silas, his family don't eat come winter. So they'd rather come up here and drag 2 women back in ropes? Clara said. Some of them, not all.
Pete straightened as much as his back allowed.
That's the other thing I came to tell you. There's a group, small, maybe 8-10 folks, who ain't buying what Silas is selling. The widow Halstead, she stood up in the meeting and called him a liar to his face. Tom Bridger, the carpenter, walked out. Emmett Tucker came back and told everyone what really happened up here. That you were defending your land. That Clara was protecting the Barlow girl. Clara's breath caught. Emmett said that? Loud enough for the whole church to hear. Silas tried to shut him up, and Emmett told him, excuse the language, to go straight to hell. Pete almost smiled. Boy's got more backbone than I gave him credit for. Where are they now? Josiah asked. The ones who walked out. Halstead's place. The widow's got a big house at the edge of town. They're gathering there, trying to figure what to do. Clara looked at Josiah. He looked back. This changes things, he said. I know. You can't fight a whole town, Josiah said. But you can split one. If half of Elk Crossing sees the truth, and the other half is just scared, then Silas's power is thinner than he thinks. I need to talk to them, Clara said. The ones at Mrs. Halstead's. Clara, not in town, not on Silas's ground. Here. They come to us. They see this place, they see Nettie, they see what's real, and then they decide for themselves. Josiah was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Pete. Can you carry a message back? Pete nodded. These old legs got one more trip in them. Tell Mrs. Halstead and anyone who'll listen. Tomorrow morning, sunrise, this gate will be open. Anyone who wants the truth can come hear it. No weapons, no tricks. Just people talking to people. Pete looked at Clara. You ready for that, girl? Some of them watched you get tied. Some of them did nothing. Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. I know. And they're going to have to look me in the eye and reckon with that. But I ain't my father, Pete. I don't turn away from hard things. The old man's chin trembled. Your mother would have been proud of you, Clara. I want you to know that. Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard and fast and didn't let the tears fall. Get going, Pete, before Silas sees you up here. Pete turned and limped back down the trail, cane tapping against stone. When he was gone, Nettie spoke up from the porch. Clara, what if they come tonight? What if Silas doesn't wait for the meeting? Clara looked at Josiah. He was already thinking it. She could see the calculation behind his eyes. If they come tonight, Josiah said, they come in the dark against a man who fought 2 years in the war and didn't die. And they come against a woman who already showed she'll pull a trigger. He paused. But I don't think they'll come tonight. Why not? Because Emmett Tucker just split Silas's base in half. Right now, Silas is scrambling. He's trying to hold his story together. A nighttime raid on a federal homestead when the town's already divided? That's not power. That's panic. And panicked men make mistakes. Clara sat down on the porch step. Her wrists throbbed. Her shoulders ached from holding the rifle. And somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where she'd stored every insult and every silence and every turned back, something was shifting. Not rage, not fear. Purpose. Josiah, she said. Yeah? When they come tomorrow, and they will come, I'm going to tell them everything. About Silas in the barn, about what he did to me, about what he made his mother do, about Nettie. All of it. I know. They might not believe me. Some won't. I'm going to say it anyway. Josiah sat beside her, not close enough to touch, just close enough to feel present. Clara, I've been to war. I've watched men lie about who fired first, and who ran, and who died brave. I've watched officers rewrite what happened to protect themselves.
And I'm going to tell you something I learned in all that mess. What?
The truth doesn't need everyone to believe it. It just needs to be said, out loud, in front of witnesses. Because once it's in the air, it does its own work. People carry it home. They think about it at night. They tell it to their wives. And slowly, one by one, it takes root. Silas can scream his lies louder than you'll ever speak, but a lie needs constant feeding. The truth just needs to be planted once. Clara pressed her palms against the warm wood of the porch she'd helped build. This wood, these nails, her hands had driven them. Josiah's words had given them frame. "One more thing," she said. "Yeah? I want to sew something, tonight, before they come." "What?" "A flag." Josiah raised an eyebrow. "Not a real flag. I want to take the white dress, the one they shamed me in, and I want to stitch it into something else.
Something they'll see when they ride up that trail and know this place ain't what they think." Josiah was quiet. Then he said, "What do you need?" "Red thread, a needle, and time." "I got all three." Clara stood. She looked at Nettie, who was watching from the doorway with wide, bruised eyes. She looked at Josiah, who sat with his hands loose in his lap, a man who'd offered everything he had to two strangers and asked nothing in return. "I'm going to need your help, Nettie," Clara said. "Can you sew with one hand?" Nettie lifted her good hand and wiggled her fingers. "I can try." "That's enough. That's always enough." They went inside. Clara pulled the white dress from where she'd crumpled it in the corner 2 days ago. She spread it on the table. The fabric was stained, torn at the hem, spotted with dried blood from her wrists. She stared at it for a long time. "I hate this dress," she said. "Then change it," Nettie said simply. Clara picked up the scissors. She cut the first line, right through the bodice, and felt something loosen in her chest. Not grief. Release. She cut again, reshaping the fabric into something flat, something wide, something that could hang from a beam and catch the wind. Nettie handed her the needle and red thread. Clara began stitching. Not words, pictures. A bird with spread wings across the center, red against white. Below it, 2 hands, wrists broken free from a loop of rope. And at the bottom, in stitches so small they'd have to come close to read them, 3 words. "Still standing here." They worked through the evening and into the night. Josiah kept watch on the porch, the axe across his knees, listening to the dark. Every so often, Clara heard him shift, or cough, or take a drink of water, and the sound of him being there was enough to keep her hands steady. Nettie stitched the border, clumsy with one hand, uneven, imperfect, beautiful for all of it. "Clara?" Nettie said, working a knot. "Yeah?" "When you stood in that doorway with the rifle, pointing it at Silas, what were you thinking?"
Clara's needle paused. "I was thinking about my mother, how she taught me to shoot and told me I'd know when the time came. I was thinking about you, behind me in that cabin, too hurt to run anymore. And I was thinking—" She pulled the thread tight. "I was thinking that I was done being the girl things happened to. I wanted to be the one who decided what happened next." Nettie blinked her good eye. It was wet. "You are." "We are," Clara corrected. "You walked 12 miles with a busted arm, Nettie. Don't you dare think you're not part of this." The flag took shape through the dark hours. By the time the first gray line of dawn appeared above the ridge, it was finished. Clara held it up, arms shaking with fatigue. The bird in the center spread its wings wide against the white fabric. The broken ropes hung empty.
And the words at the bottom, stitched in red, caught the first light like a promise. Still standing here.
Clara carried it outside and hung it from the porch beam. The morning wind caught it immediately, lifting the fabric, spreading the wings of the bird so it looked alive. Josiah stood from his watchpost and looked at it. He didn't say anything for a long time. "That's not a flag," he finally said. Clara frowned. "What is it then?" "A declaration." Nettie came out and stood between them. 3 people on an unfinished porch, bruised and tired and awake. Below the ridge, the trail stretched toward El Crossing. Somewhere down there, people were making their choice. Silas was sharpening his lies, and the town was splitting in 2. Clara squared her shoulders. Her wrists ached. Her eyes burned from a night without sleep. And the white dress that had been her shame now flew above her head, remade by her own hands into something no one could take from her. She heard them before she saw them. Hooves and boots and wagon wheels coming up the trail from town, moving slow and steady through the early morning heat. Clara gripped the porch railing and didn't look away. The first face Clara recognized was the widow Halstead. She came on foot, leading a mule with a basket strapped to its back, her gray hair pinned tight under a bonnet that had seen 20 summers. Behind her walked Tom Bridger the carpenter, hat in his hands, eyes on the ground. Then came Emmett Tucker, still mounted, still young, still looking like a man who'd surprised himself by choosing right. After them, more. The postmaster's wife, the school teacher, Miss Granger, who'd closed her door on Clara 2 years ago and now stood at the fence with her hands clasped like she was walking into confession. Old Pete brought up the rear, his cane striking the dirt in slow rhythm. Clara counted 12.
12 people who'd climbed a ridge in the early heat to hear the truth from a girl their town had tried to break. Josiah opened the gate. He didn't speak, just stepped aside and let them file through. Some of them looked at him with curiosity, some with suspicion. Big Tom's wife, a stout woman named Ada, stopped in front of Josiah and said quietly, "My husband's sorry. He wanted to come, but he couldn't face you." "He faced me fine yesterday," Josiah said. "Tell him I respect a man who walks away from a bad fight." Ada nodded and moved on. They gathered in front of the porch, 12 people standing in the dirt, looking up at a girl in a flannel shirt with bandaged wrists and a flag made from her own shame hanging above her head. Nobody spoke. Nobody seemed to know how to start. Clara did. She walked down the porch steps and stood in front of them, not behind the gate, not behind Josiah, in front of everyone, exactly where she'd stood in that town square 3 days ago, except this time the ropes were gone, and the choice was hers. "I know why you're here," she said, "and I know some of you were there when they tied me. So before I say anything else, I need to look at each of you and ask one question." She turned to Miss Granger. The school teacher flinched. "Miss Granger, you taught me to read when I was 7. You put a book in my hands and told me words could set a person free. Do you remember that?" Miss Granger's chin trembled. "I remember." "Then why did you close your door when I walked past? Why did you stand in that square and watch Edna Whitmore tie me to a wagon?" Miss Granger's voice broke. "Because I was afraid, Clara. Silas told the school board he'd have me removed if I interfered. I've got no family, no savings. That school is all I have. So you traded my freedom for your comfort." The words hit like a slap. Miss Granger closed her eyes, and tears tracked down her weathered cheeks. "Yes. God help me, yes." Clara held her gaze for a long moment. Then she moved on. "Tom Bridger,
You built the wagon they tied me to. Did you know what it would be used for?" The carpenter looked sick. "No. Edna Whitmore commissioned it for the market display. I didn't know until I saw you in it." "But you saw me, and you stayed." "I did." "Why?" Tom Bridger swallowed hard. "Because I told myself it wasn't my business, that the community had decided, that stepping forward would make it worse." His voice cracked. "I was a coward, Clara. Plain and simple." Clara nodded. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't offer forgiveness. She just let the truth sit where he'd placed it. She went through them, one by one. Not all 12. Some she skipped, people she didn't know well, people who'd come out of genuine confusion rather than guilt. But the ones who'd been there, the ones who'd watched, she looked each of them in the eye and made them say what they'd done. The postmaster's wife admitted she'd laughed when Edna pulled the knots tight. Old Pete admitted he'd spoken to Harlan and then walked away when it was clear her father wouldn't act. Emmett Tucker admitted he'd been part of the group Silas assembled, but swore he didn't know about the tying until it happened. Each confession cost something. Clara could see it in their faces, the way admissions stripped away the comfortable lies they'd been telling themselves. She wasn't gentle about it. She didn't have it in her to be gentle. But she wasn't cruel either. She asked, she listened, and she let the silence do the rest. When she finished, she climbed back up the porch steps and turned. "Now I'm going to tell you what really happened. Not the version Silas sold you. Not the story Edna dressed up in scripture. The truth." She told them everything. She told them about Silas cornering her behind the feed store, about his hand on her arm, his whiskey breath, his voice saying she didn't get a choice. She told them about his proposal, if you could call it that, delivered like a verdict, not a question. She told them about saying no and the way Silas's face changed, the mask slipping, the boy underneath showing teeth. She told them about the Shoshone trader, a man named Running Elk, who'd stopped at the trading post and talked to her about horses. That was all. Horses. They'd laughed because his mare had the same stubborn streak as Clara's mother's old gelding. She'd touched his hand when he showed her a scar from a kick. That was the entire crime. She told them how Nettie Barlow had arranged the meeting, not for romance, not for scandal, but because a 15-year-old girl saw her friend drowning in loneliness and tried to throw her a rope that wasn't made of hemp. And then she told them about Nettie. "Come out here, Nettie," Clara said. Nettie stepped through the cabin door. She'd washed her face that morning, but the swelling hadn't gone down. Her eye was still shut, purple and yellow, and her arm hung in the flour sack sling Clara had made. She stood in the doorway, small and thin and 15 years old, and let them see. The widow Halstead gasped. Miss Granger covered her mouth. Emmett Tucker looked away, jaw clenching. "This is what Silas Whitmore does to a child," Clara said. "He told her uncle to tie her to a barn post. Her uncle wrenched her arm so hard something popped. She dislocated her own thumb to slip the rope and walked 12 miles through the night to get here." Nobody spoke. "She's 15, Clara said again. 15. Tom Bridger sat down in the dirt, just sank, like his legs gave out. He put his face in his hands and didn't make a sound, but his shoulders shook. The widow Halstead was the first to move. She walked up to the porch, looked at Nettie, and held her arms open. Nettie hesitated, glanced at Clara, and when Clara nodded, the girl stepped forward and let herself be held by an old woman who smelled like lavender and flower, and the kind of safety that shouldn't have taken this long to find. "Child," Mrs. Halstead whispered, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry we let this happen." Nettie didn't answer. She just held on. Clara let the moment breathe,
Then she said, "I didn't bring you here for apologies. Apologies don't fix what's broken. I brought you here because Silas Whitmore is planning to ride up this ridge with armed men and take this homestead by force. He told you I'm dangerous. He told you Josiah kidnapped me. He told you we're a threat to Elk Crossing." She paused. "You've seen the truth now. You've seen a girl with a broken face and a woman with rope scars. You decide what's dangerous." Emmett Tucker stepped forward.
"What do you need from us, Clara?" "I need witnesses. When Silas comes, and he will come, I need people who will stand here and tell him this land is legal, these women are free, and his lies don't hold."
"He'll come with guns," Emmett said. "He might. And you want us to stand here anyway. I want you to do what you didn't do in that square. I want you to be present. That's all. Just don't look away this time." The weight of that request settled over the group. Clara watched faces shift, watched people look at each other, watched the calculation happen in real time. Risk against conscience. Safety against truth. The widow Halstead spoke first. "I'll stay." Tom Bridger stood up from the dirt, wiped his face, and said, "I'll stay." Miss Granger's voice was barely a whisper. "I'll stay." One by one, they committed. Not with speeches, not with bravery,
Just quiet words from ordinary people who'd finally decided that standing still was its own kind of violence, and they were done with it. Emmett Tucker was last. He looked at Clara with eyes that carried more weight than his 20 years should have held. "Clara, there's something else you should know." "What?" "Your father was at the church meeting last night. When Silas called for the ride, Harlan stood up." Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. "What did he say?" Emmett hesitated. "He said he'd lead it." The ground shifted under Clara's feet. She grabbed the porch railing. Josiah moved closer, not touching her, just there. "He volunteered," Emmett continued. "Told Silas he'd bring Clara back himself. Said it was a father's duty." Clara's vision blurred. She blinked it clear, refusing to let the tears form. "His duty. He calls it duty now." Where was his duty when I was bleeding in the square? Where was his duty when I called his name and he looked away? Nobody had an answer. "He's drunk," Clara said flatly. "He's been drunk since my mother died. He'll say whatever Silas wants if there's a bottle at the end of it." "Maybe," Emmett said. "But drunk or sober, your father riding up this trail changes things. People in town who are on the fence, they'll follow Harlan because he's your blood. If your own father says you need bringing back, it's harder for folks to argue." Clara felt the familiar weight settling on her chest, the one she'd carried since the day her mother closed her eyes and her father opened his first bottle and never looked at Clara the same way again. The weight of being somebody's daughter and nobody's priority. "Let him come," Clara said. Her voice was iron. "Let him ride up this trail with Silas Whitmore and every man in Elk Crossing. I'll say the same words to his face that I'm saying to yours. And if he wants to drag me back in ropes, he'll have to look at these." She held up her bandaged wrists. "And do it anyway." Josiah spoke for the first time since the gathering started. "We've got maybe 6 hours before they ride, less if Silas pushes. I need every able body helping me reinforce this fence. Not for fighting, for standing behind. A line of people is harder to charge through than a line of posts." Tom Bridger was already rolling his sleeves. "Tell me where you need boards." "Everywhere," Josiah said. They worked through the heat of the day, 12 townspeople and 3 homesteaders, building not a fortress, but a statement. Tom Bridger showed Josiah faster ways to join timber. Mrs. Halstead organized water and food. Miss Granger, who'd never held a hammer in her life, drove nails beside Nettie, the two of them working in tandem, the school teacher and the student she'd failed, building something together that neither could have built alone. Clara worked hardest of all. She sanded, carried, measured, hammered until her bandages soaked through again, and Josiah had to wrap them a third time. "You're going to lose those wrists if you don't stop," he said quietly, tying the knot. "I'll stop when it's done." "Clara." "What?" He held her hands in his, gentle, looking at the bloodied cloth. "Margaret used to do this. Work until she broke, because stopping felt like giving up. I watched her do it for 2 years. You know what I learned?" "What?" "Resting ain't quitting. It's choosing to be strong tomorrow instead of empty today." Clara pulled her hands back, but she sat down, and she drank the water he brought her, and for 10 minutes she let somebody else carry the weight while she breathed. Late afternoon, the postmaster's wife came running from the Ridge Lookout. "Dust on the south trail! A lot of it!" Josiah climbed the highest point and looked. He came back with his jaw set. 20 riders, maybe more, moving fast. 20, Clara repeated. Silas called in every debt he had. Clara looked at the 12 people who'd come to stand with her. 12 against 20. No guns, no authority. Just truth and tired bodies and a flag made from a ruined dress. "Anyone who wants to leave, leave now," Clara said. "I won't hold it against you. This ain't your fight." Nobody moved. "I said—" "We heard you," the widow Halstead said firmly. "And we're staying. Now stop asking and start getting ready." Clara almost smiled. Almost. They formed a line behind the fence. 12 townspeople, shoulder to shoulder, with Clara, Josiah, and Nettie on the porch. Josiah had the axe. Clara had the rifle. Nettie had a wooden box she'd carved that morning, though nobody but Clara knew what was inside it. The riders appeared at the edge of the clearing. Silas Whitmore rode in front, flanked by Lyle Cooper, who'd apparently found his courage at the bottom of a bottle, and Big Tom, who couldn't meet Josiah's eyes. Behind them rode a wall of men, most of them looking uncomfortable, some of them angry, all of them armed in one way or another. And at the rear, mounted on the same bay mare he'd ridden for 20 years, rode Harlan Dawson. Clara's breath left her body when she saw him. He looked older than 3 days should have made him. Thinner. His clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes were red, and his hands shook on the reins. He was drunk. She could tell from 50 yards. The looseness in his shoulders. The way his head tipped forward like it was too heavy for his neck. But he was there. He'd come. Her father had ridden out with the man who'd had her tied to a wagon, and he'd come to bring her back. Something inside Clara turned to stone. Silas raised a hand, and the column stopped. He surveyed the scene, the reinforced fence, the line of townspeople, the flag snapping in the wind above the porch. His smile was gone. What replaced it was something harder and more honest. Fury.
"Well," he said, "looks like you've been busy."
"We have," Clara replied from the porch. "Lot of building gets done when nobody's tying your hands." Silas's eyes swept the line of people at the fence. He recognized each of them. Mrs. Halstead, Tom Bridger, Emmett. He shook his head. "I'm disappointed." "We ain't here for your approval, Silas," the widow said. "You're here making a mistake." Silas dismounted. "I came to collect 2 runaways and deal with a homesteader who threatened me with an axe. That's the beginning and the end of this. Anyone standing in my way is obstructing community justice." "There ain't no community justice here," Josiah said from the porch. "There's a man who can't handle being told no." Silas's face darkened. "I've had enough of you, Cain." "Then leave." "Not without what I came for."
Silas turned and looked past the riders. "Harlan, get up here." The crowd parted. Harlan Dawson urged his mare forward, slow, unsteady.
He stopped in front of the fence and looked up at the porch. Clara looked down at her father. 2 years of silence stood between them. 2 years since the last time he'd called her by name without anger in it. 2 years since the night she'd found him passed out on the floor with her mother's shawl clutched in his fist, and she'd covered him with a blanket, and he'd woken the next morning and told her she reminded him too much of the woman who'd left him. "Clara," Harlan said. His voice was thick and uneven. "Come home." "That house hasn't been home since Mama died," Clara said. "Don't say that." "It's true. You stopped being my father the day you crawled into that bottle. You stopped being a man the day you let them tie me to a wagon." Harlan flinched. The crowd was silent. Even Silas didn't interrupt. "I called your name," Clara said, and now her voice was shaking, not with fear, but with the effort of holding back 4 years of grief. "I stood in that square with ropes cutting into my skin, and I called for you. You were 30 feet away. 30 feet. And you looked at me like I was already dead." "I didn't know what to do," Harlan whispered. "You knew exactly what to do. You chose not to do it." "Clara, please." "No." She came down the steps, walked past Josiah, past the line of townspeople, all the way to the fence. She stood 3 feet from her father's horse and looked up at the man who'd made her and abandoned her in the same lifetime. "I loved you," she said. "Even after Mama died. Even when you drank. Even when you stopped looking at me. I loved you every single day, and I waited for you to come back, to be my father again. And you never did." Harlan's face crumbled. His lips pressed together and his eyes filled, and for the first time since her mother's funeral, Clara saw her father cry. "But I'm not waiting anymore," Clara said. "I built a porch. I drove nails into wood with my own hands. I held a girl who walked 12 miles with a broken arm because your friend Silas had her tied to a barn. I pointed a rifle at a man who tried to take away everything I'd built, and I did all of it without you." Harlan's hands dropped the reins. They hung at his sides, empty, useless. "So here's what's going to happen, Daddy." Clara used the word deliberately, and it cut deeper than any blade. "You're going to get off that horse. You're going to walk through this gate. And you're going to sit on the porch I built and look at what your daughter became without your help. And then you're going to decide if you want to be part of it, or if you want to ride back to that empty house and drink yourself to death. But either way, you're never tying a rope to me again. Not with your hands, not with your silence, not with your shame." Nobody breathed. Harlan Dawson stared at his daughter. He stared at the bandages on her wrists, and the fire in her eyes, and the flag above the porch made from the dress his dead wife had sewn. And then, slowly, like a man waking from a long and terrible sleep, he swung his leg over the saddle and dismounted. He stood on the ground, shorter than Clara remembered, smaller, and he walked to the gate. "Harlan!" Silas shouted. "What are you doing?" Harlan didn't turn around. He opened the gate, walked through it, and closed it behind him. He stood in front of Clara, close enough to touch, and he said the only words that mattered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, baby girl." Clara's iron cracked. Not all of it, not enough to break, but enough to let one sob through, hard and ragged and 4 years overdue. She pressed her forehead against her father's chest and let him hold her, just for a moment, just long enough to remember what it felt like before everything went wrong. Then she pulled back, wiped her face, and turned towards Silas Whitmore. "Your army just lost its general," she said. Silas stared at Harlan's back. The color had drained from his face. He looked at the 20 riders behind him, and Clara could see the calculation, the desperate math of a man watching his power dissolve. "This changes nothing," Silas said, but his voice had lost its edge. "It changes everything," Josiah said from the porch. "You came here with a father to drag his daughter home. Now that father's standing on our side of the fence. What story are you going to tell the town tonight, Silas? What lie covers this?" Silas's mouth worked. Behind him, riders were shifting, murmuring. The men who'd come out of fear were watching Harlan Dawson, a man they'd known for decades, standing with his daughter against the boy who'd promised them contracts and security. And the calculation was shifting. One rider turned his horse and left. Then another. Then 3 more. Silas watched them go, his face turning red, then white, then something beyond color. "You'll all pay for this," he said. "Every one of you." "No," Clara said, and her voice carried across the clearing like the bell she'd hung on the porch. "We won't. Because tomorrow morning, I'm riding to the territorial office in Cheyenne with a signed statement from every person here about what you did, about the tying, about Nettie, about the threats. And when the federal marshal reads it, your father's church and your mother's sermons and your mine contracts won't mean a damn thing." Silas's hand dropped to his belt. Josiah raised the axe. Clara raised the rifle. 20 people held their breath. But Silas Whitmore didn't draw. He stood in the dirt with his hand on his holster and his empire crumbling around him. And he did the only thing a coward knows how to do when the walls close in. He turned and rode away. The dust settled slow. Clara lowered the rifle and set it against the porch railing. Her arms were shaking again. Her wrists screamed. But she stayed standing because falling down wasn't something she did anymore. Harlan stood beside her, quiet, uncertain, like a man learning to breathe in a room he'd forgotten existed. Clara didn't take his hand. She wasn't ready for that. Maybe she wouldn't be for a long time. But she didn't send him away either. "You can sleep in the barn," she said. Harlan nodded. "That's fair." "It ain't about fair, Daddy. It's about earning back what you threw away. And that starts tonight." He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "How?" "Stay sober. That's all. Just one night. Can you give me that?" Harlan Dawson straightened his spine. It was a small thing, an invisible thing. But Clara saw it, and she held onto it like a candle flame in a long, dark room. "I can give you that," he said. The sun was going down. The riders were gone. The flag turned golden in the last light, and on the porch of a cabin built by broken hands, Clara Dawson stood surrounded by every kind of family there was. The one she'd been born into, the one she'd chosen, and the one that had chosen her back. Nettie brought out the wooden box she'd carved. She opened it and placed it on the porch railing. Inside was a note, folded small, and a tin of salve. "For the next girl who runs," Nettie said. Clara touched the box. Then she looked at Josiah, who stood at the edge of the porch, axe at his side, eyes on the trail, still guarding, still steady, still making space for her to become whoever she needed to be. "Josiah," he looked at her. "Thank you. For the knife, for the cabin, for not asking me to be small." Josiah held her gaze. "You were never small, Clara. The world just kept trying to put you in a smaller box." Clara reached out and took his hand. Not because she needed steadying, not because she was falling, because she wanted to. Because choosing to reach for someone was different from being dragged. and she finally knew the difference. Josiah's rough fingers closed around hers, gentle as he'd been with the bandages, strong as he'd been with the axe. He didn't pull her closer. He just held on. And Clara held on back. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat on the porch with the rifle across her knees, watching the trail, listening to the dark. Not because she was afraid, because she wasn't finished yet. Inside the cabin, Nettie slept curled on the cot. In the barn, Harlan lay on a hay bale with a horse blanket pulled to his chin, sober for the first time in longer than Clara could count. And Josiah sat at the other end of the porch, sharpening his knife on a whetstone, the slow scrape of metal the only sound between them. "You should rest," Josiah said. "Can't. Cheyenne's a 2-day ride. You'll need your strength." Clara turned the rifle in her hands.
I keep thinking about what happens when I get there. What I say. How I say it. Whether they'll believe a 19-year-old girl over a man who controls half the commerce in the territory. "They'll believe the bruises," Josiah said. "And they'll believe Nettie's face. And they'll believe 12 signed statements from people who watched it happen. And if that ain't enough?" Josiah stopped sharpening. He looked at her, and in the dark, his gray eyes held a steady light. "Then we come back here, and we keep building. And we make this place so solid, so visible, so full of people living free, that the truth becomes undeniable. Because that's what truth does, Clara. It outlasts everything." Clara leaned her head back against the cabin wall. "You really believe that?" "I buried a woman and a baby boy because nobody came to help. And I'm sitting here, 3 years later, on a porch I built with my own hands, next to a girl who stared down 20 armed men with a hunting rifle. So yeah, I believe good things survive. It just takes longer than we want." Clara closed her eyes. "Josiah." "Yeah?" "When I get back from Cheyenne, I want to build a second cabin." He was quiet for a moment. "What for?" "For the next one. The next girl who shows up barefoot with rope burns. Nettie won't be the last. We both know that." Josiah set down the whetstone. "You're talking about making this place into something permanent." "I'm talking about making this place into something Silas Whitmore can never tear down. Not just a homestead, a refuge, somewhere women can come and not be afraid, where they can heal and learn to build and figure out who they are without some man telling them." "That's a big idea for 40 acres. Then we'll need more acres." Josiah looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Margaret would have liked you." Clara's throat tightened. "Yeah?" "She'd have called you stubborn and pig-headed and impossible, and then she'd have rolled up her sleeves and started hammering right beside you." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It's the highest one I've got." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of them were ready to name yet. Things that lived in the space between two people who'd found each other in the middle of ruin and discovered they could breathe easier together. Clara opened her eyes. "I'm leaving at dawn. Nettie comes with me. She needs to give her statement in person." "I figured. I'll stay here with Harlan and the others. Keep the place standing." "You trust my father?" "No, but I trust that he saw his daughter's face yesterday, and it scared him worse than any bottle ever could. Sometimes fear's the first step back to being human." Clara nodded. She stood, set the rifle by the door, and looked down at Josiah. "If Silas comes while I'm gone..." "He won't get past the gate." "Promise me." "I promise." She held out her hand. He took it. They stood like that for a breath, 2 breaths, and then Clara squeezed his fingers once and went inside.
Dawn came hot and golden. Clara saddled the horse, while Nettie ate bread on the porch, her swollen eyes starting to open, the bruising fading from purple to yellow-green. Ugly, but healing. Everything about them was ugly, but healing. Harlan came out of the barn. He looked rough, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling, but not from drink, from withdrawal, from the body's rebellion against the first honest decision it had been forced to make in years. "Clara," he said, "let me come with you." "No." "I can testify. I was there. I saw what they did." Clara tightened the cinch strap. "You were there because you were on his side." "I know. That's why they'll believe me. A man who was part of it, turning witness? That's stronger than any victim's statement." Clara stopped. She hated that he was right. She hated that the world worked that way, that a guilty man's confession carried more weight than an innocent woman's truth. But she was done fighting how things were. She was focused on making them different. "You ride behind us," she said. "You don't talk to me unless I talk to you first. And if you take one drink between here and Cheyenne, I'll leave you on the side of the road and not look back." Harlan nodded. "Fair." "It ain't about fair. It's about trust. And you've got none left with me. You want to earn some back? This is where it starts." They left at first light. 3 riders moving down the ridge trail. Clara in front, Nettie in the middle on a borrowed mule, Harlan at the rear on his bay mare. Josiah watched them from the gate until they disappeared beyond the tree line. The ride to Cheyenne took a day and a half. They camped once, by a stream where the water ran cold and clear. Nettie slept against Clara's side. Harlan slept 10 feet away, facing the fire, his hands still shaking. In the dark, while Nettie breathed soft and steady, Harlan spoke. "Your mother made that dress for your wedding." Clara stiffened. "I know what she made it for. She worked on it every night for 3 months, sat by the lamp and sewed until her fingers bled. She said she wanted you to feel like the most beautiful woman in the territory on the day you chose somebody. She said, chose. She did. And you let them turn it into a punishment." Harlan's voice cracked. "I know. She would have killed you for that, Daddy. She would have walked into that square and cut those ropes herself. And then she would have dragged you home by your ear and made you sleep in the yard for a month." A sound came from Harlan that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "She would have. Lord, she would have." "So why didn't you?" "Because when she died, the part of me that knew how to be brave died with her."
And I've been a ghost ever since, Clara. Walking around in a man's body, doing what the loudest voice told me to do, because it was easier than thinking for myself.
"That ain't good enough."
"I know.
"It might never be good enough."
I know that too." He paused. "But I'm here, sober, riding to Cheyenne to tell a federal marshal that I let my daughter get tied to a wagon and I did nothing. You think that's easy?"
"I think it's the least you can do."
"You're right. It is the least. And I'm starting with the least because I don't deserve to start anywhere else." Clara lay still, staring at stars she'd learned to love again on Josiah's porch. Her father's words sat in her chest like a stone that was slowly, slowly warming. She didn't forgive him. She wasn't sure she ever would. But she recognized something in his voice that she hadn't heard in 4 years. Her father, not the drunk, not the coward. The man who'd once carried her on his shoulders through a thunderstorm because she was afraid of lightning. The man who'd taught her to ride and told her she was braver than any boy in the county. That man was still in there, buried under 4 years of whiskey and grief, and he was clawing his way back to the surface.
"Daddy," Clara said.
"Yeah?"
"Don't make me regret this."
"I won't."
"You will. You'll slip. You'll reach for a bottle. You'll disappoint me again. But if you get back up every time you fall, I'll keep the door open. That's the deal.
Harlan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady for the first time since they'd left. Deal. They reached Cheyenne the following afternoon. The territorial office was a squat building near the courthouse, with a flag out front and a clerk behind a desk who looked like he hadn't smiled since the war ended. "Help ya?" the clerk said without looking up. "I need to see the federal marshal," Clara said.
Marshal Dunn's busy. Then he's about to get busier.
Clara set a folded stack of papers on the desk. 12 signed statements. Her own account, Nettie's account, and Harlan's confession, written in his own hand during the ride, ink blotted where his hand had shaken. The clerk looked at the stack. Then he looked at Clara. Then he looked at Nettie, her arm still in a sling, her face still carrying the evidence of what a man could do to a child when power went unchecked. He stood up and went through the back door. Marshal James Dunn was a tall man with a silver mustache and hands that looked like they'd done equal parts writing and fighting. He came out, looked at the three of them, and said, "Sit down." They sat. Clara talked. For an hour she talked. She laid out everything: Silas's proposal, the refusal, the retaliation, the tying, the public humiliation, Nettie's assault, the ride to the homestead, the confrontation, the threats. She spoke clearly, without tears, without drama. Just facts, one after another, like nails driven into wood. Nettie spoke next, shorter, quieter, but devastating. She described her uncle's hands, the barn post, the dislocated thumb, the 12-mile walk in the dark. Marshal Dunn's pen stopped moving twice during her account. Both times he had to take a breath before continuing. Then Harlan spoke. "I'm her father," he said, "and I stood on a porch 30 feet away and watched my daughter get tied to a wagon by a woman acting on orders from a man my daughter refused to marry. I didn't stop it. I didn't speak. I let it happen because I was too drunk and too weak to do what a father's supposed to do." Marshal Dunn studied him. "You understand you're implicating yourself?" "Yes, sir." "And you're willing to testify to this in a formal proceeding?" "I'll testify to it anywhere you want. Courtroom, church, town square. I'll stand where my daughter stood and say it loud enough for God to hear." Dunn leaned back. He looked at Clara. "Miss Dawson, what you're describing, the public binding, the community enforcement, the retaliatory assault on a minor, these are federal offenses on territorial land, especially given the coercion element, a rejected marriage proposal leading to organized punishment. I can have a warrant drawn up by morning." "For Silas?" Clara asked. "For Silas Whitmore, Edna Whitmore, and the blacksmith who assaulted Miss Barlow. Possibly the sheriff, if he was complicit." "Sheriff Redding stood by and watched," Clara said. "He put his hand on his holster when Josiah cut me free." "Then him too." Dunn picked up the stack of statements. "I'll ride to Elk Crossing myself, with deputies. This isn't a local matter anymore." Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain. Relief. The kind that comes after years of pressure finally finding a way to release. She gripped the arms of the chair and breathed. "Miss Dawson," the marshal said, "you did a brave thing coming here." "No, sir. I did a necessary thing. Brave would have been if somebody had done it before me." They stayed in Cheyenne that night, a boarding house near the train depot, 2 rooms, Clara and Nettie in one, Harlan in the other. He handed Clara his room key and said, "Lock yours. I'll be fine." Clara took the key. Then she said, "There's a saloon across the street." "I see it." "You going?" Harlan looked at the saloon, looked at it the way a drowning man looks at water, with equal parts longing and terror. "No," he said.
Not tonight.
If you do,
I know. Road. Left behind. Not looking back.
Clara nodded. She went to her room, locked the door, and sat on the bed beside Nettie. He's trying, Nettie said.
Trying ain't the same as doing.
No, but it's the step before. Clara looked at the girl.
15 years old, beaten, arm in a sling, face still swollen, and somehow the wisest person in the room. When did you get so smart, Nettie Barlow?
About 12 miles into a barefoot walk through the dark, Nettie said. You learn real quick what matters when your feet are bleeding.
They left Cheyenne at dawn. The ride back felt different, lighter.
Clara sat taller in the saddle, and when they crested the last ridge and saw Josiah's cabin below, the flag still flying from the porch beam, she felt something she hadn't felt since before her mother died. Home. Josiah was at the gate. He'd seen them coming from the ridge. He opened it without a word and let them ride through.
"How'd it go?" he asked, handing Clara a cup of water.
"Marshall's riding the Elk Crossing by week's end. Warrants for Silas, Edna, the blacksmith, and the sheriff."
Josiah's eyebrows went up.
"All four?"
"All four."
He looked at Harlan, who was unsaddling his mare with slow, deliberate hands.
"He stay sober?"
He did.
"How do you feel about that?"
Clara took a long drink of water.
"Scared," she said,
"because now I have to hope. And hope's the most dangerous thing I know."
2 days later, Marshal Dunn rode into Elk Crossing with 4 deputies and a stack of federal warrants. Clara heard about it from Emmett Tucker, who rode up the ridge that evening, breathless, his horse lathered.
"They arrested Silas at the feed store," Emmett said, barely stopping to dismount. "He tried to run. Made it about 50 yards before a deputy tackled him in the horse trough. You should have seen it, Clara. Face down in the water, sputtering like a cat." Clara didn't laugh. She wanted to, but it wasn't funny yet. Maybe someday. Edna? Went quiet, walked to the deputy like she'd been expecting it, held her wrists out and didn't say a word. Preacher Whitmore tried to intervene, started quoting scripture about a wife's duty to her husband. Marshal Dunn told him to sit down or join her.
"The blacksmith?" Emmett's face darkened. Barlow fought, threw a hammer at a deputy, and barricaded himself in the forge. They pulled him out after an hour. He's in the territorial jail now.
And the sheriff?
Redding turned in his badge before Dunn even asked for it. Walked out of his office, laid it on the desk, and said he wasn't fit to wear it. Last I saw, he was sitting on the church steps, staring at nothing. Clara sat on the porch step. Nettie was beside her, listening to every word, her good hand gripping Clara's arm.
"It's done?" Nettie whispered. "The arrests are done," Clara said. "The trial's coming. That's a different fight." "But they're gone. Silas is gone."
"He's in a cell, yeah." Nettie pressed her face against Clara's shoulder and cried. Not the broken, terrified crying of a girl who'd walked 12 miles in the dark. This was different. This was the sound of a weight being lifted, the sob that comes when you finally stop holding your breath. Clara held her and let her cry, and didn't tell her to stop. The days that followed moved with a different rhythm. Without Silas's grip on the commerce, the town began to shift. Slowly, uncomfortably, like a limb waking up after being pressed too long in one position. Tom Bridger brought lumber up the ridge. He didn't ask what it was for, just stacked it by the barn and said, "I owe you more than wood, but wood's what I've got." Miss Granger came with books, a crate of them, hauled on a mule. She set them on the porch and said to Nettie, "You're too smart to stop learning. I'll come twice a week if you'll have me." Nettie looked at Clara. Clara nodded. "I'll have you," Nettie said, "but I picked the books." The widow Halstead brought seeds, squash, beans, corn, sunflower. She showed Clara how to read the soil and where to dig.
A woman who can feed herself, Mrs. Halstead said, don't need permission from anybody.
And one morning, a woman Clara had never seen walked up the trail, carrying a baby in one arm and nothing else. She was thin, hollow-eyed, with a bruise across her collarbone shaped like a man's hand. She stopped at the gate and said, "Is this the place?" Clara came down from the porch. "What place?" "The place where women can come. The woman at the trading post told me about it. Said a girl with rope scars built it. Said there's a flag." Clara looked up at the white dress, still flying, the red-stitched bird spreading its wings against the fabric. Still standing here. "Yeah," Clara said. "This is the place." She opened the gate. The woman walked through with her baby pressed against her chest, and Clara led her to the porch and gave her water and bread and a chair in the shade. Nettie brought a blanket for the baby. Josiah moved his tools from the table without being asked. That night, Clara added a second name to the cabin's doorframe. The first had been her own, carved the day she'd driven her first nail. The second was Nettie's, added when the girl had finished stitching the flag. The third was Ruth, the woman with the baby, carved that evening while Ruth slept in the cot and her child breathed soft against her chest. Harlan carved the fourth, his own, small and low, in the corner of the frame where it wouldn't crowd the others. Clara watched him do it and said nothing. But she didn't stop him either. Josiah found her that evening, standing at the edge of the clearing, looking out over the valley. Elk Crossing was a scatter of rooftops in the distance, catching the last golden light. "You could see that town from here forever," Josiah said, coming to stand beside her. "I don't want to see it forever. I just want to know it's there, that it's changing." "It's changing. Not fast enough." "It never is." He paused. "Margaret used to say that change was like bread. You do the work. You mix and knead and wait, and then the heat does the rest. But you've got to be patient enough to let it rise." Clara smiled. "You quote your wife a lot." "She was smarter than me. Seems wrong to let good words die just because the person who said them is gone." Clara turned to face him. They stood close enough that she could see the gray in his eyes shifting with the fading light. 3 weeks ago, this man had been a stranger who'd knelt beside a wagon and cut her free. Now he was the first person she looked for in the morning, and the last voice she heard at night. "Josiah," she said. "Yeah." "I'm not ready." "I know." "But I want to be, someday. And I want it to be you." Josiah's face changed. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in stories. Just a softening around the eyes, a loosening of the jaw, the kind of shift that happens when a man who's been holding his breath for 3 years finally lets it go. "I'll be here," he said. "I ain't going anywhere." "You promise?" "I already promised. At the gate. When you left for Cheyenne." "That was about the homestead." "No, it wasn't." He reached out and took her hand, slow, careful, giving her every chance to pull away. "It was about you. It's always been about you, Clara." She laced her fingers through his. His hand was rough, scarred, warm. A builder's hand. A protector's hand. A hand that had cut ropes and driven nails and held a dying woman's fingers and somehow still had gentleness left in it. "Then stay," she said, "and we'll build the rest of it together." "What's the rest of it?" Clara looked back at the cabin. The flag was moving in the evening wind. On the porch, Nettie was reading by lamplight, while Ruth nursed her baby. Harlan was stacking wood by the barn, slow and careful, sober for the 5th day in a row. And somewhere inside the cabin, on a doorframe carved with names,
There was space left for more.
Everything, Clara said.
Every single thing they told me I couldn't have. The trial came 6 weeks later. Clara rode to Cheyenne in a clean shirt and trousers, her hair braided tight, her wrists healed to thin white lines that she didn't hide. Nettie rode beside her, eye healed, arm free of the sling, sitting her horse like a girl who'd forgotten how to be small. Harlan rode behind them, 6 weeks sober, his hands steady on the reins for the first time in years. Josiah stayed at the homestead. Someone had to keep the gate open. The courthouse was packed. People from Elk Crossing, from neighboring towns, from settlements Clara had never heard of. Word had traveled the way truth always does, quietly, persistently, through every crack in every wall. Clara testified for 3 hours. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She looked the judge in the eye and told him everything, from the proposal to the tying, to the ride to the cabin, to the standoff at the gate. She showed him her wrists. She showed him the signed statements. She showed him the flag, which she brought folded in her saddlebag, the white dress remade, the bird in red thread, the words stitched at the bottom. Still standing here. Nettie testified for an hour. The courtroom went silent when she described dislocating her own thumb to escape the rope. A woman in the gallery stood up and walked out, unable to listen. 2 men on the jury wiped their eyes. Harlan testified last. He stood before the judge, hands clasped in front of him, and said, "My name is Harlan Dawson. I am Clara's father. And I am here to tell you that every word she said is true. I know because I watched it happen. I watched, and I did nothing. And that is the thing I will carry for the rest of my life." The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. Silas Whitmore was convicted of conspiracy to commit assault, coercion, and unlawful imprisonment. 7 years in the territorial prison. Edna Whitmore was convicted of assault and public humiliation. 3 years. The blacksmith Barlow was convicted of assault on a minor. 5 years. Sheriff Redding, who'd turned witness for the prosecution, received a suspended sentence and a permanent ban from holding public office. When the verdicts were read, Clara sat in her chair and pressed her palms flat against her thighs. She didn't cheer. She didn't celebrate. She looked across the courtroom at Silas Whitmore, whose face had gone the color of old ash, and she said nothing. Because the verdict said everything. Outside the courthouse, Emmett Tucker was waiting. He tipped his hat. "Justice looks good on you, Clara." "Justice looks good on everybody, Emmett. That's the whole point." They rode home to Broken Ridge, the 3 of them, side by side now, no one leading, no one trailing. When they crested the ridge and saw the cabin, Clara pulled up short. Josiah was on the porch, hammer in hand. But he wasn't alone. Tom Bridger was there, and the widow Halstead, and Miss Granger, and half a dozen people Clara recognized from the gathering. And beside the cabin, framed and half-walled, stood the skeleton of a second building. "What is that?" Clara called from the ridge. Josiah looked up and almost smiled. "You said you wanted a second cabin." Clara rode down the trail at a gallop. She swung off the horse and walked to the new structure, running her hand along the fresh-cut timber. The frame was solid. The joints were clean. The foundation was level and true. "When did you start this?" she demanded. "Day after you left," Josiah said. "Figured if you were riding to Cheyenne to fight for the future, somebody ought to be building it." Clara looked at the cabin, then at Josiah, then at the people who'd shown up to help. The same people who'd once stood silent in a town square, now standing with hammers and saws and the slow, difficult work of becoming better.
"It needs a name," Nettie said, coming up beside her. "The cabin?" "All of it. The homestead. The place. What we're building here."
It needs a name people can say when they're scared and need somewhere to go.
Clara thought about it. She looked at the flag above the porch. The white dress turned declaration, the red bird with spread wings. Red Bird Ridge, she said. Nettie tested it on her tongue. Red Bird Ridge. For the bird on the flag, and for the thread that holds it together. Josiah nodded. I'll carve the sign. He did. That evening, while the last light turned the ridge to gold, Josiah carved the name into a plank of pine and nailed it to the gate. Clara stood beside him, her hand on his arm, and read the words that would outlast all of them. Red Bird Ridge. All are welcome. None are owned. The summer stretched long and warm over the valley. The second cabin was finished by August. A third was started in September, when two sisters from a mining town arrived with nothing but each other and a story that sounded too much like Clara's. Nettie ran the school Miss Granger had started. 15 years old, teaching women twice her age to read and write and sign their own names on documents that mattered. Harlan built fences, quietly, steadily, one post at a time. He didn't drink. Some days his hands shook so bad he couldn't hold a hammer, and on those days he sat on the porch and whittled, because Josiah had told him that keeping his hands busy kept his mind from eating itself. Clara and Josiah worked side by side, the way they'd done from the beginning, building, mending, planning, making space. And somewhere in the middle of all that work, in the passing of tools and the sharing of meals and the quiet evenings on the porch, the thing between them that had no name found one. Not in a grand moment, not in a kiss under moonlight or a declaration by firelight. It happened on a Tuesday, while Clara was sanding a doorframe and Josiah was hanging a hinge, and she said, "Hand me the chisel." And he said, "Which one?" And she said, "The one you love?" And he said, "That's not a chisel, that's you." Clara stopped sanding. Josiah stopped hanging. They looked at each other across the doorframe they were building together, sawdust in their hair, calluses on their palms, and Clara said, "Took you long enough." "I was waiting for you to be ready." "I'm ready." "I know. I can tell by the way you asked for the chisel." She laughed, a real laugh, full and free, the kind that comes from a place that used to hold nothing but pain. And Josiah smiled, the first real smile she'd ever seen on his face, and it changed him entirely, made him look younger, made him look like the man he'd been before grief had carved him down to bone and purpose. He reached across the doorframe and cupped her face in his rough hand. She leaned into it. Not because she was falling, because she was choosing, and the difference was everything. "I'm going to kiss you now," Josiah said. "About time." He did. And it was gentle and brief, and tasted like sawdust and coffee, and the promise of 100,000 ordinary days spent building something good. When they pulled apart, Nettie was standing in the yard with her arms crossed and a grin splitting her face. "Finally," the girl said. "Mind your business, Nettie Barlow," Clara said. "You are my business." Nettie walked away whistling, and Clara couldn't even pretend to be annoyed. That night, they sat on the finished porch of the first cabin at Red Bird Ridge. Clara, Josiah, Nettie, Harlan. 4 people who'd found each other through rope and ruin and the stubborn refusal to stay broken. The flag moved above them. The bird spread its wings, and the words at the bottom, stitched by a girl who'd been tied to a wagon and told she was nothing, caught the starlight and held it. Still standing here. Clara looked at Josiah. He looked back. Their hands found each other, easy and natural, the way hands do when they've already built a world together. "Josiah," she said. "Yeah."
We did it.
We did.
No, she squeezed his hand. I mean, we really did it. They tied me to a wagon, and I'm sitting on a porch I built with my own hands, next to a man I chose with my own heart, raising a girl I saved with my own courage. They wanted to make me a warning. I became a welcome.
Josiah lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, right over the calluses, right where the strength lived. You became more than that, Clara Dawson, he said. You became the reason that gate never closes. And it never did, not that year, not the next, not in the years that followed, when Redbird Ridge grew from a cabin on a clearing to a name spoken in whispers by women across the territory. A name that meant safety, that meant freedom. That meant someone had already walked the hard road and left the light on behind her. Clara Dawson was tied to a wagon at 19. She was cut free by a stranger, built a home with her own hands, faced down the man who tried to destroy her, and turned a white dress of shame into a flag of survival. And every morning, when she stepped onto that porch and felt the boards solid beneath her feet, she said the same 3 words she'd stitched into the fabric. Still standing here. Because she was. Because they all were. Because no rope ever made could hold a woman who decided she was free. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Echoes of the West. Tell us in the comments, if you'd seen Clara tied to that wagon, would you have stepped forward? And remember, the gate at Redbird Ridge never closes. Not for you. Not for anyone.